So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our attendees. I would like to take this chance to introduce our speaker. And before that, I just wanted to mention the aim of the webinar that we are having. And this is first to help the young surgeons and young clinicians to really have the tools to develop excellent grant applications in relation to cancer. The pragmatic, practical ways of doing this was introduced by our speaker last time, Professor Wim Selin, and now we will hear the patient perspectives in the development of research projects and research grant applications. And later we will have an even bigger view of developing collaborative international research projects. So to introduce our first speaker, we have Lidi Meus. He is the Managing Director of Anti-Cancer Fund, a Belgian research foundation, Belgian Research Foundation of Public Utility, with an international scope dedicated to the development of cancer treatments regardless of their commercial value. Lidi has co-founded the Anti-Cancer Fund in 2013, together with Luc Verwilst. And she is also a breast cancer patient diagnosed in 2018 and has successfully been treated since then. In 2019, Lidi was appointed by the European Commission as alternate to represent patients for 3 years in the Commission for Advanced Therapies, one of the seven committees at the European Medicines Agency. Lately, she has also been involved in a lot of advocacies on drug repurposing in cancer therapies. We're also very pleased to have Isabel Rubio, who is the director of the breast surgical unit at Clínica Universidad de Navarra. Dr. Rubio is trained as a breast surgical oncology fellow at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences at Little Rock and at the MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. Dr. Rubio is the president-elect of the European Society of Surgical Oncology and is also the president of the European Society of Breast Cancer Specialists, EUSOMA. So thank you for being here as well. So Lidi, maybe we can start.
Yes. I hope you can see my slides now.
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Carmela, for the nice introduction. Oh, wait, I have moving my slides. Let's see how that goes. Oh, doesn't seem to work. The moving the slides. No.
Lidi, you can try stop sharing the screen and then go into your presentation and just restarting it.
Okay, let me try again. Maybe I should go to this view and then go to like this. And then, now it works. Thank you. Sorry for that. So as Carmela already explained, I'm the Managing Director of the Anti-Cancer Fund, and we are a research foundation, Belgian, but we work internationally. And we have two main areas of activity, I would say. On the one hand, we support non-commercial clinical research. And on the other hand, we also inform patients on an individual basis. So I have those two heads, and I will explain a little, because they are both related to the talk here, I would say. So what do we mean with non-commercial research? Well, a very important specification for our research is that it's patient-centered. So the trial must serve patient interest. And we also expect from the applicants that they have already thought of a strategy for implementation in clinical practice. So for us, the end of the clinical research is not only a publication, it's good to have that, but there should be a clear strategy how to bring it into the clinic. And also important for us is that the trial must record patient-reported outcome measurements, the famous PROMs. I'm not going to elaborate on this. There's quite some specialized and more interest in the right measurement of the patient-reported outcomes. Then the other pillar of our organization is called My Cancer Navigator. And as I said, we are researchers. It's a small team. We are like 15 people connected, working, and everybody is focused on cancer treatment. And the idea was, yeah, our knowledge on cancer treatment, maybe we can share that with patients and put that at the service of patients. And that's how the whole idea came of My Cancer Navigator. So what we can do, patients can contact us with questions regarding their treatment. And then a medical doctor will talk with them, collect their questions, and then we will do research, either literature research or looking into clinical trial databases. We have an internal meeting with the dedicated team, also involving external experts, to discuss the answers, and then the MD will go back to the patient, explain by mail or by phone as they prefer the answer. So although we are located in Belgium, we serve patients, and it's a free service, of course, all over the world, but of course we only can deal with patients in English, French or Dutch. Then I asked the team for some examples of questions that come to us that relate to cancer, to the surgical part of the cancer treatments. A very popular question is, of course, am I in the best place to get my surgery done? Then, especially for prostate cancer, surgery versus radiation. And then another question is about the operability of the tumor. And I must say we have some, well, I have a personal anecdote there also, where for brain tumor, a friend of mine was said in a community hospital that he was inoperable, but yeah, he went to a university clinic, and he was lucky to find a surgeon who was willing to operate him. At the time, he was put into the Stoop trial, the famous Stoop trial. And I must say now, 20 years later, he's still there for glioblastoma patients. It's quite exceptional, but yeah, in some cases, this can really make a difference. Another question that often pops up is about in oligometastatic disease, again, operation, yes, no, outcome options. And there, of course, we look in the literature, what has been published, but unfortunately, until today, not that much. And another question also where there's not very much documentation or good clinical trials where you can find the evidence is the question about removal of the primary tumor in case of metastatic disease. Just some examples. Okay, but as Carmela said, I'm a patient myself, so that was quite an interesting experience. So I was diagnosed thanks to the screening program in Belgium. Yeah, because my tumor was not palpable, so thank you to the screening program for picking it up. Then, of course, even I'm a scientist myself, I also got all kinds of questions that are similar to the questions that came in our service. So first question, where do I get operated? And yeah, the screening was done in a community hospital, but I decided to go to the university hospital for my treatment. And then, for example, one of the things I realized that there are, yeah, different possibilities. First, I understand that people prefer sometimes to stay in a local hospital for their surgery, but I think we all know that there's really an important correlation between volume in case of surgery and outcome. So that's something we try to explain to patients if they come to us early enough, and that this type of documentation is available. And in Belgium, we even have the situation that small clinics cannot operate on breast cancer anymore. You need to be recognized as a breast cancer center. That's quite a recent evolution, which, at least from my perspective, I think is a step in the right direction to have more specialized surgical centers for breast cancer. And because, yeah, what I realized then was the difference between the one clinic and then the university clinic was about the operation. You either have an operation, a one-step operation, where you have your sentinel lymph node removed, you have a quick analysis on frozen sections, and then the decision is taken for the axillary lymph node dissection. But of course, you're not involved. But then when I talked to my surgeon, he said, yeah, we normally do 2 steps. And because I wanted to know, what is your decision tree for lymph node removal? Knowing the questions we get about lymphedema, and also the Allianz trial, I don't know how you pronounce it, which clearly was a very nice trial, I think, with a very high impact, and showing that, yeah, the lymph node removal is not required if you only have micrometastasis or only one metastasis, that it doesn't make a difference in 10 years for survival difference. So yeah, for me, that was very convincing. So I was very happy with that 2-step process. Of course, the disadvantage is in worst case scenario, you need another operation 1 week later. But for me, even being in the business, this was a new given, that those possibilities were out there. Then, yeah, maybe interesting also was that in the end, my chemotherapy was not according to standard treatment, because my team came up with a Tolonais regimen that has meaning that for my particular case, you could drop the anthracyclines as adjuvant treatment. There has never been an RCT, but there are good data out there, good evidence, 7-year follow-up, no difference. So yeah, for me then it was clear that I should have the Tolonais regimen, although most university centers, at least in Belgium, follow that now. But you see again, the smaller centers who work by the book, it's not the official standard treatment. Just to say that personalized information, a well-informed patient, also in my case, is an important given. But okay, let me switch gears to the real topic now of this presentation, is why should you have patient input for your grant application, and what can you expect from that? First, I think it's an illusion that there is something like the patient's input, because patients you have all kinds of patients. You have individual patients, like I am, and the questions we get, I show you, is from individual patients, and this is ideal for having inspiration, I think, and for picking up ideas, what is living with patients, and what are the research questions that still need to be answered when it comes to surgery. But then you also have the patient advocates and the patient organization representatives, and those are well-structured organizations, and those are the ones that you need to approach if you want, let's say, to do policy work, to get changes in the system. It's good to talk to this type of organizations to really support your ideas for policy work. There you need the patient advocates and the patient organizations. And then when you talk really so to patients about your own grant application, the best partner there, I think, are patient experts. And what do I mean with patient experts? Yeah, those are patients that know what a clinical trial is, how it works, how the whole system works. And you have two types of patient experts. You have, just people who are in the field and then who happen to get cancer. Like in my case, you have doctors who get cancers and people working in pharmaceutical industry. So they know the system and they are, automatically a patient expert. But you also have patients who get very motivated and who follow education about the whole clinical development system to become a patient expert. Like EUPATI, there has been a large European program to educate patients to become what they call a patient expert. And you see that more and more happening. And you have more and more of this type of what is called, diplomated patient experts that you can contact to give input for your specific grant application. So, and then the grants, I think today it's really the right momentum for applying grants around surgery for cancer because of the two things. We have the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan that comes from the Commission Health in Europe, but we also have the Cancer Mission, and the Cancer Mission is one of the 5 missions, and that's from the Commission Research that has defined those 5 missions, and the mission for health is now cancer. So that's kind of fortunate that those both items coincidence, way of speaking. In Europe, they try to coordinate it. That, of course, they don't want to work in silos, Commission Health and Commission Research, and they cooperate. But here I would also like to flag that Professor Picard has been on the board of the Cancer Mission. So they had a board, and Professor Picard was part of that board for the past 3 years. So maybe specific questions can also be answered by her. And I think it's good to know that the European Commission is really focused on patients and patient-centeredness. Just like I mentioned at the beginning, also our organization, we try to have that patient-centered aspects in our grant. Maybe I can tell you that the key performance indicator of that whole Europe's Beating Cancer Plan has been defined as that the European Commission expects that in 2030, 10-year cancer-specific survival will be reached for 75% of the patients, of the cancer patients in Europe. So that they keep on saying that for them, the endpoints of overall survival and quality of life are the most important ones. And that's where personally, I think there's really a big, a major opportunity for surgical trials, because surgery is very important when it comes to having an impact on survival. That we all know, quality of surgery is of prime importance, but it seems really that policymakers at all levels, that they only have low awareness of that central importance of surgery. And my personal view is that that is due to the really very professional lobbying of the pharma industry. So, and that's something that struck me also in our policy work. When you talk to members of European Parliament, people at the Commission, it's all about cancer drugs, but you hardly hear something about surgery. And that's, of course, the politicians are driven by the lobby work. That's a reality we have to live with. And therefore, I say, I also mentioned those patient advocacy groups and patient organization representatives. It's important also that they really draw attention to the importance of the multidisciplinarity of oncology treatment, and certainly to the surgery, I think. So to show you that this is the actions regarding treatment, and there from the mission on cancer, and there you see one of the 4 points is clearly develop a clinical trial program on treatments. And also here you see a declaration of the trio presidency of the council. So I don't know, maybe you are not so familiar with how Europe functions, but you have the European Commission that is quite active and powerful, of course. But in the end, the final decisions are taken by the Council of Europe. So if you ask me, the most powerful level in Europe is the Council. And the Council has an alternating presidency, 3 countries, each country for 6 months, and then they agree on setting the agenda, putting the priorities. And I show you here something that came out of the trio presidency of the Council of Europe that has just passed, Germany, with Germany and Portugal and Slovenia. So they really have put that patient centricity high on the agenda already. And now, since January, France now has the presidency, and it will, and France will be followed by Czechia and Sweden. So let's hope, and I'm pretty convinced that patient centricity, that whole idea of involving patients in all your research will remain at the policy agenda. And even the regulators, I know that maybe in surgical research, the regulators are somewhat less important than compared to drugs. But you see here that the International Council for Harmonization, this is an international organization between the European, the EMA, FDA, Australia, Japan, all the big players try to harmonize their regulation. And they just came out last month with this concept of clinical trials, the general considerations. I've put the link here on clinical studies. And you see that also there's quite some attention for the idea of bringing the patient, involving the patient, not only when the protocol is ready, but from the start in the design of the study. And I would dare to say this is really, for me, the most important change we have seen over the past years in clinical research, that we try to be more patient-centered at all levels. So here I've picked some slides from my collaborator, Gauthier Busch, who is responsible for the clinical research in our organization, and he presented to ESSO last year those about trial IDs. So the good IDs and the bad IDs. You can read it for yourself, but as I mentioned, something we have to change here is that it's important that you collaborate with your peers, that you set up large collaborations, but very important is also to involve in an early stage already patients. And yes, this is another slide for him that you have to roll up your sleeves, and there are a lot of hurdles to take, but I understood that Wim Seelen has explained all of that in the previous webinar, and that he made some good suggestions on how to deal with all this. Yes, and then I also would like to flag this document. We collaborate with another foundation in Switzerland called Rising Tide, and they really recently have put an interesting document at the service of the applicants about patient involvement. And they worked on this together with PAT Advocates, which is a patient advocate organization led by Jan Geisler, a very professional organization, I must say. So you can, this is a short summary of that document, what you should check and how you should work with patients. And I found it very useful, so maybe you can have a look at that. Yeah, an important detail also, you have to take into account if you involve patients in your grant applications, that you should foresee also budget for that, because patients are volunteers, and yeah, and certainly the expert patients that I mentioned, yeah, if they put time in it, they need some kind of compensations, because they are becoming more and more popular, and therefore it's important that that is something that you foresee in your budget, that you will pay them for their contribution to your grant application. And then, yes, those are two other websites that could be of interest maybe to you. I already mentioned EUPATI, that European project for educating patients, and they now have, they just started with this type of service. If you are looking for expert patients, you can contact them and they can connect you with the right persons. And there's another hub that also can be used for finding the right patients for your grant application. So yeah, this was it for me. It was a brief overview, but yeah, as I said, our director clinical research will be at the next ESSO meeting. Also, you can talk to him, but of course, I'm also happy to take your questions now. Thank you. And I will stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Lydie. Maybe I would like to ask my co-chair, Isabel, if you already have some questions. And to our attendees, please do not hesitate to post your questions on the Q&A. And in the meantime, we also want to recognize the presence of one of the co-chairs today, Alessandro Gronchi. So Isabel, maybe you have some.
Yes, thank you, Carmela, and thank you, Lydie, for this very inspiring talk, because I think that you mentioned several points that are important in terms of how to develop a better pathway for the patients, not only in terms of research, that it's the webinar now, but also in all the pathway that they are facing. And I think that it's important when you said about your surgery and surgical oncology. I am glad that you acknowledge that surgery is one of the pillars in the treatment of cancer. And I think that it's right that with the lobbying of all the medical and the industry and the medical oncology, it seems that surgery is not like an important pillar anymore. But I think that nowadays, you know, from surgical oncology and from the European Society of Surgical Oncology, we are trying to speak up in the name of the surgical oncology at the European Parliament, because I think that not everybody realizes how important it is to have a good surgery done to start with. So I agree with that. I also want I have a couple of comments and then I will ask you a couple of questions. I also think that it's important, and you mentioned it, is the right of the cancer patients to be treated in a cancer center, whether it's a breast cancer center or it's another, or a cancer center, a comprehensive cancer center. And even though the European Beating Cancer Plan acknowledged that this is something that it's a real need for cancer patients, the problem here stays in the implementation in the member states. I think that at the end, we need to define what is a cancer center, what is a breast cancer center, and we still need, and I think that the patient advocacy groups still need to do a lot of work telling the patients and answering all these questions regarding, you cannot have surgery anywhere, you cannot be treated anywhere, you cannot be treated in places where there is not a multidisciplinary care. And multidisciplinary care is not that the surgeon operates on you and you see a medical oncology across the street. I mean, it means a whole different picture. So I think you mentioned that, and I think it's important. So my question goes, when you said that when you are applying to a grant, or you are trying to incorporate the patients into the design of a in the research process, you mentioned that it's good, and you show some slides that it's good to identify the right patient organization or patient advocates. And I think that maybe that is one thing that I would like to ask you, because I think it's not easy when you are trying to design something, which patient to ask, which organization to ask. And I'm sure, and I acknowledge that the patient organizations are doing a lot of job training patients, because, it's not only that you have had a cancer that you can be part of a research project, because, you maybe know a lot from your cancer, but you maybe don't know, the whole picture of the cancer. So that's my question. What do you think there is still need to be done in this term, and how can, if someone decides to do that, where can they just approach a patient organization or advocacy group to be part of that?
Yeah, you are fully right, Isabel. That's the big challenge, and that's something we, as a grant, as a funder, also struggle with. When we talk to our applicants, find the right patients to talk to. But I must say, the good example for me, honestly, is actually what BIC is trying to do now with the Patient Partnership Initiative. I think that's a very professional organization, and but yeah, I'm afraid at this point in time there are not that many, and it's a big challenge. And I hope the 2 links I gave at the end about where you can try to find, and I think it's trial and error. You have to be honest. You can try with a patient or patient groups, and then if it doesn't work, yeah, maybe then you have to look for somebody else. That still remains the big challenge, to find the patients that, yeah, really, I would say that fit with you. you need a fit, and it's difficult for the time being. But the good news is there are more and more things starting up, smaller ones, bigger ones, but we need more of that. And the whole problem is, of course, as usual, the money. So that's also something very important in policy work, and that's what we are kind of not happy with, is that Europe really wants indeed that patient-centered approach. But it was even worse. They stopped giving funding to patient organizations and to NGOs. So, but that has been revised now. Luckily, Stella Kyriakidis came back on that decision, because, yeah, what happens then is that all the patient organizations, and that's also a difficulty, they get indirectly funding from the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can, they try to avoid that, but it doesn't work. We know that in reality, a lot of the patient organizations are funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And of course, they only hear about drugs and drugs and drugs. And yeah, it's surprising that whole concept that surgery is still the main treatment in curative setting, that it doesn't arrive at the patients.
Mm-hmm. Lydie, I want to really thank you for highlighting that part. And I think the Anti-Cancer Fund has really done such a great effort to help the surgeons, at least ESO, in this regard, to push for more clinical, to support clinical research led by surgeons, and to support a lot of the research that doesn't necessarily have commercial value. And this is, I think, very, very important. I want to ask you as well. You mentioned, so for sure we recognize that the role of specialized cancer centers in the treatment and management of cancer patients. But I'm just always wondering, I always feel, coming from my background now in clinical research, I feel like, and maybe this is a question for Lydie, for Isabel, and for Alessandro, because you are really there in the clinical setting. The role of the local hospitals and community hospitals because I understand that they're the first contact of a lot of the patients when it comes to diagnosis and, let's say, assessment of complications. I feel like from the clinical research perspective, we have almost zero knowledge, or, we're blind. We are blind about the activities of the community hospitals and local hospitals when it comes to informing patients about cancer treatments, cancer options, and even access to clinical trials. Maybe I want to get your opinion on this, how if there's something to be done on that aspect. And maybe a little bit in relation to that, so you mentioned about the patient-reported outcomes, and I feel like for surgeons, this is something very important, because I always felt like the assessment of surgical complications, there's the surgical clinical assessment, but somehow we miss also the patient feedback on surgical complications. So maybe I would like to ask our panelists on these two things. Maybe Lydie, you can start.
Unfortunately, I'm not the expert on PROMs and quality of life, but I know from discussion I had actually at the EMA and in the CAT that the kind of standard validated quality of life questionnaires, they are not really exactly the same as a patient-reported outcome measurement, because the quality of life mostly are just filled in by the clinicians who tick the box sometimes. So, but there you really have to talk to the experts in the field, and there are good groups now working on really more patient-reported outcome measurements, and that's where we need to go, exactly for what you say. Ask the patients what about the impact of the complications and so on. We're not there yet, but I think it's also growing knowledge in that area, but you have to talk to people specialized in that. I'm afraid I'm not the best person to.
Maybe I would like. Okay, maybe I would like to ask the input or the comment of Isabel or Alessandro about these two things as well.
Okay, so Alessandro, do you want to go ahead and? Okay.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Okay, so what Lydie was mentioning, and I think it's important, it's that we really don't have like any way or any international recognized way of knowing the patient-reported outcomes. And nowadays, what we do is that the patients fill these questionnaires that for quality of life that are validated international, but we don't really, nobody has a feedback on those questionnaires. They are there, the patient fill it, and then the second thing is that, when talking to the patients, you realize that every time they see a specialist in their cancer care, there is a different there is a different feeling that they have. For example, you talk to a patient who is going to have surgery and they want to know everything related to the surgery. They want to know many things that you probably don't even think that they want to know. So at the end, I think that we should, in a way, try to put together in the different pathway of the patient with the different specialists along all the treatments and the diagnosis, what the patients feel and what the patients want to change in the different parts. And I think that until we don't do that, if the patient feel a quality of life questionnaire when, after the surgery, after the chemotherapy, before the radiation therapy, when they go to the rehabilitation for lymphatic drainage, I mean, those quality of life really doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you put the whole picture. So I think that it will be good in a way to try to standardize different pathways, because, I like very much a sentence from a patient who were saying that, we keep talking about personalized cancer treatment, but how personalized is that? Because, he didn't feel that there was any personalized treatment in his approach, because he has so many questions that were not answered, and nobody seems to be listening to him. So I think that in a way, we need to get together with the patient groups and try to define how can we assess what is the patient feelings, what is the patient participation in the different pathway, in the different treatments, and then, put everything together, and that can only be done in a cancer center or in a place where, you have all these facilities. Yeah. And regarding the community, I think that the community hospitals can do a great job, but not treating cancer patients. They can do a great job in other parts, for example, in the screening, they can do a great job in the primary physicians, talking to the patients, trying to explain them, how to change their lifestyle to reduce the risk, trying to define which patients will need a genetic testing, So I think that the community hospitals can do a great job, and the primary care physicians can do a great job in the patient pathway. But I don't think they can treat the patients in the community hospitals, because at the end, the whole multidisciplinary approach is lost. And I always think that when you're diagnosed with cancer, the first treatment is the one that counts most. So it's the most important treatment that you can have anytime, because if the first one fails or is not well performed, or you have other options that they didn't realize, then, everything will go bad. So I think that the first treatment is so important that, it doesn't matter if it takes 2 weeks to get the treatment, but you need to go to a place where you can see all the options. So, and I think that still in Europe, we are not there.
Maybe Alessandro, if you also want to comment.
Yes, I think it's also important to consider that this you need to tailor the strategies according to the different cancer types. So there is not just one single cancer type. There is not just one single community or just one single network. So if you're talking about breast cancer, then you need to involve also breast cancer groups that could collaborate with ESSO. So I believe that ESSO should be able, if we want to foster trial performance, the trial organization, also under the umbrella of ESSO, ESSO needs to partner with other organ-based societies for each cancer type. Otherwise, it becomes much more difficult because there is not one single strategy, in fact, no. So many of I basically agree with all what has been said, and I believe that on the one hand, of course, the involvement of patients is critical, but also the involvement of the other partners, the other actors, the other players that deal with cancer treatment, especially at presentation, is critical. So I see surgical oncologists doing study not only on surgical modalities, but also on all other modalities that help increasing the chance of cure of the patient with localized disease. So I believe that one of the duties of surgical oncology is this, actually, improve the chance of cure in patients who have localized disease, and the collaboration with oncologists and radiation oncologists is critical to set this up, and coordinating this approach, orchestrating the work together is something, is one of the skills that surgical oncologists need to develop to fulfill their mission.
Yeah.
Yes, but I think that right now that ESSO should try to convince to work together with major patient advocate groups to make sure that the European decision makers just start with calls that are really focused on surgery. You see what I mean? That's how they don't realize the importance of the surgery for cure, for really, and if you could link and explain to them that surgery is the link to their KPI, that patients should live longer and better, then they have to organize calls for surgery. They just don't know that. They have no clue. And if patient organizations together with ESMO could bring that message to the European decision makers, I think that, and it's, the time to do it is now, because there is, I think, 4.1 billion available in the coming years for cancer. So that message should reach the decision makers today, way of speaking.
Yeah, but in a way, picking up with what Alessandro mentioned about how the surgeon should be doing these kinds of clinical research, because if the perspective is really it's going to be a multidisciplinary approach, then as much as we are biased because we are in the field of surgery and this is what we really want to improve, on the other hand, we really need to think about how the surgical decision will really be part of a puzzle of the whole our treatment armamentarium. And so what this means is that when we develop trials, we need to think, we probably cannot be thinking about a purely surgical trial these days. There will be a role for that, I think, in specific areas, but we will always probably need to think about the surgery in relation to other types of treatments. And in a way, strategically, this is probably the way we will have more trials that are supported, that can be supported in a larger scale. But on the other hand, it's very, very important for the surgeons, and I think Isabel and I were both involved in this paper, position paper, where we really said surgeons need to be there at the round table, at the steering committees of these, let's say chemo or drug trials, because a lot of times the endpoints that these neoadjuvant trials they are pushing for, they forget the importance of the surgical part. But sometimes the surgeon cannot lead the trial, but the surgeon has to have a say when we develop these trials, at least.
Yeah, fully correct. It has to be a multidisciplinary team.
Yeah, but at the end it's a problem, and I think that that we make a lot of effort for the Europe-Beating Cancer Plan to have some different approach to the surgical oncology as it was, in the first draft, because one of the things that they were only considering research in the medical oncology research. So they were considering research on drugs mainly, or only in drugs. They didn't even mention any research on other, not on diagnostic and screening, not on surgery, surgical oncology, not on radiation oncology, so radiation therapy. So they only consider so you know, I think that at the end, the final draft was changed, and there is a call for funds for surgical oncology research. And I think that's important, because I agree that there are many clinical trials where we need to be in the same loop as the medical oncologists, because they are neoadjuvant trials or radiation oncology trials and all that. But I can tell you that surgical oncology would be much more innovative if there were more funds for the surgical oncology research, because there are many things that you can do that you don't do because it's impossible to get a grant for research. And I think that all of us are feeling that thing, and I'm not saying that it's only a problem of funds, but that's a huge problem. So I think that in the new Europe Beating Cancer Plan, and I'm happy that in the plan there is a part where they are going to have a feedback on implementation of the different calls of the plan, and I think that's going to be very important in terms of knowing which member states are going to implement what it's draft or decided on the European Parliament as a recommendation. And I think that at that point, maybe some things will change, but it will take some years. But I think that we need to still keep pushing in this direction, because I think that we mostly agree on the same lacks in clinical research, really.
Yes, and coming back to that idea of Carmela on the multidisciplinarity, that's really the ideal way to go, because and we should be able to work together, which is not always easy. Another example that I had was for head and neck surgery versus radiotherapy. And yeah, the one clinic, the community clinic said surgery, the university clinic said radiotherapy. The community clinic had a robot and they want to use their robot, and then, yeah, the patient, and there are no studies. Ideally, you should have those comparative effectiveness with quality of life recording, because that makes a difference in head and neck, if the surgery or the radiotherapy. And patients ask us, and we have no answers, because there's no decent trials done for that type of quite basic approaches. But as Carmela rightly said, we need to be able to have those collaboration, this multidisciplinarity to compare the things. We have to face it. If you think of the patient first, then you should be able to set up that type of trials.
Maybe Lydia, I just want to also just mention, because you also introduced the topic of the effort that is being done by the Breast International Group when it comes to patient partnership, the Patient Partnership Initiative. I must say, of course, this is a very new effort from BIG that aims to really do what was mentioned a while ago, to really bring in the patient perspective in the very, very early stage of clinical trial development. In the platform that we have at the moment, we already have several patient advocates from different parts of the world who are much more ahead in terms of the experience as a country of their of the way their patient advocates are involved in every step of clinical trial development. I must say, for BIG, we are just starting this effort, but what we can really see is that there is from the clinician perspective, just quoting one of our from our recent discussions, there is always a fear of the clinicians to involve patients in this journey of clinical trial development, knowing how frustrating it can be. But on the other hand, we heard from our patient partners that somehow they're actually ready to face this long and winding road of clinical trial development. And this is something very encouraging for us, because then it comes at the right moment, I think, because a lot of the academic groups really need to be paying attention to how we are really putting the patient needs, patient priorities on the agenda of our research development. So I do hope we will be successful in really making things happen. But we are learning so much from the patient advocates who are really who are already part of this initiative. They are teaching us more than we are teaching them in a way. So that's something important for BIG as of the moment.
So again, if I can make a comment.
Yes, please.
I believe that everything should start from a good question, of course, right? So then operation, in terms of operation, I mean operationals and so on, the better is the question, the easier it becomes. The second thing is to get engaged, yes, of course, patients, but also groups. Again, I want to emphasize this because this happens this is important not only for rare cancers. So I'm an expert in rare cancer more than in common cancer, but even in common cancer, because the faster is the accrual, the lower are the costs. So if you are able to get together a large group, you also have a higher chance to be successful in getting funded.
Yeah.
Also from, I mean, charities, from the Cancer Fund, for example, that is actually helping a lot in this situation. Because the likelihood of the study to be meaningful, I mean, to be impacting is higher. Because you have involved the largest group, because you have and so it's really important to sit together, create working groups, to roundtables, to discuss ideas, and to be on board at the same time. What is the drawback of this? If you do a single initiative, people will complain because they want to have the first role. I mean, who is chairing, who is coordinating, right? So it is very important to be able to give everybody a position to do something. So you may, if you want to sit at the same table, several different opinion leaders or coordinators of different groups, you need to give every one of them a role. So one has not to be too ambitious in being the only one, and one has not to be alone. I believe that going together is easier. And again, I am a rare cancer specialist, so I do sarcomas, so I don't do breast cancer. So I'm forced to, in a way, to collaborate. But yet, I believe that if you want to go far, you need to go with other people. And doing studies today is really challenging from so many different aspects that you have very well highlighted in the past hour. That if you are not able to create the network, you end up by failing or doing studies that are not really impactful, and at the end are a loss of money. Because if you do and also, I mean, I think is a kind of a betrayal of your patient that you put on a study.
Yeah.
Isabel, what do you think?
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think of course, you know, in cancer now, it's everything, every step that you take in research, at some point it will involve the other groups. And I think it's important that even though it's one is the group that start the trial, you know, I think I agree with you that, you know, at the end, you know, everybody has a small part that can be done in the same group. The problem is that I think we need to realize that we need each other, and I'm not sure that we are there yet.
I completely agree with at least what has been said already. First of all, that point about asking the right question, and in this regard, I guess it's very, very important to understand the frame of the question from the medical or clinician side, and then also from the perspective of the patients, because sometimes it's a little bit surprising, but sometimes it's not the same how we perceive the question. I also definitely agree with the statement that there is so much great need for collaboration these days, and I think that and for this reason, this webinar was really intended to show these different views when we develop clinical trials. One part, it's not just about the writing of a good research question or a good research project. We need to understand the patient perspective, and then we need to make it work. And the way to make it work is through collaboration. And so I probably would really want to thank Lydie for this important talk that you made. And also I want to segue also, because the topic is now, how do we make something happen that can really impact the practice of cancer treatment, not just probably in a small way, but in a big way. And I think for this talk, of course, we are very thankful to have the Professor Martine Pical to give us some insights on how we can harness industry and academic partnerships to really make things happen in the international scale. And of course, also I would like to thank in advance Alessandro for being the co-chair for this next session that we will have. Martine and Alessandro are both big players in large-scale international research. So thank you both. Dr. Pical, maybe you can, if you want, you can already.
Hello, thank you very much, Carmela. I'm sorry, I just joined now because it's my clinic day. So I missed the talk of Lydie, and it's a pity, but anyway, thank you for the invitation. And so what I thought I would do today is not to give a formal, very theoretical talk. I thought that the best was perhaps to just share with you my experience in leading a very large academic intergroup for more than 20 years and give you some concrete examples of problems that we had to solve during these 20 years or so. And hopefully you will better remember how challenges perhaps sometimes can be overcome if I share with you real stories rather than just giving a list of principles. So I guess that you have my slides, Carmela?
No,
you don't have them.
No.
Okay. Wait a minute. Alors, je sais le faire normalement. Diminuer ça. Oui, mais je dois tomber sur mon talk. Ah oui, oui, oui. OK. I think it's going to work. I hope. Yeah. Yeah. Do you see the slides?
Yes. Yes.
And it's, I think it's okay, huh? It's already, no?
Yeah. You can click the, yes, yeah.
Non, c'est déjà.
Non, non, non.
Mais si. Si, c'est en grand.
Yeah.
Mais non, il n'est pas en... Voilà, comme ça, maintenant,
Mhm.
il est en...
Yeah.
Okay.
This is
Good. Okay, so I'll start by a plan of the talk. So I will start with a brief history why we decided to create in 1999 a network of academic cooperative groups. Then, and that's going to be quite interesting, I hope, which lessons we learned from designing large adjuvant pivotal trials with the pharmaceutical industry, which barriers and which potential solutions to clinical trials cooperation inside an umbrella organization. And there, again, I will make a distinction between trials run in collaboration with the pharmaceutical industry, but I will also talk a little bit about trials which are very close to my heart and which are pure academic trials without any commercial interest. Okay, so why a network of breast cancer academic cooperative groups? Well, it is because of the big changes we witnessed in the landscape of clinical cancer research at the turn of the century. So first of all, we started to realize that breast cancer was not one disease, was not even two diseases, because for many years as a young oncologist, I lived with two entities, estrogen receptor positive, estrogen receptor negative breast cancer. But as you can see, things became a lot more complex. And around 2005, we started to make a distinction between 4 breast cancer subtypes. And we also became aware that it was going to be much better to design specific clinical trials for these different entities. So HER2 positive breast cancer, the subtype where we have done the greatest progress, the luminal cancers, A and B, which are, of course, the hormone receptor positive breast cancers, HER2 negative, and then the triple negative breast cancer subtype, which until recently was the subtype with very little progress. And you see that things continue to become more and more complex because inside of these different subtypes, now with the modern technologies, we also realize that there is a lot of heterogeneity. Now, clearly, what we also realized was that it was very important to make sure that academic research in oncology would survive and would not simply disappear. And I like to define academic research as the guardian, ensuring that patients' needs remain top priority in our clinical trials. And so we were really worried 20 years ago, and I can tell you it's still the case today, because what we could see was the progressive disappearance of pure academic trials. And on the opposite, a marked increase in commercial trials. And why did academic trials become so rare? It was because of the exponential growth in all the bureaucracy surrounding clinical trials. And that made the trials incredibly expensive and very difficult to run if you do not have a pharmaceutical industry interested in your clinical trial. And at that time in 1999, there were 2 large academic organizations, the EORTC and the International Breast Cancer Study Group. I'm talking now here about breast cancer research. But at the same time, we could witness a rapidly growing number of national groups, different national groups in Germany, in France, in the UK, and so on and so forth. And so what we thought was needed at that time was first to accelerate the delivery of innovative therapies to patients, in particularly those with the rare disease entities, and HER2 positive breast cancer or triple negative breast cancer could be considered to a certain extent as relatively rare disease entities. We also thought that it was very important to reinvigorate academic involvement in clinical trials. And also we were really worried to witness a huge duplication of efforts. So if you would just screen the clinical trials that were designed towards the end of the 20th century, you could see the same clinical trial going on in France, in Germany, in UK, each of these trials having an insufficient number of patients to get enough statistical power. And so it was in a nice meeting in Bordeaux in France that I had the opportunity to discuss these worries with my friend and colleague Aaron Goldhirsch. I explained to him that perhaps we should do the same as our American colleagues had done, meaning try to create a structure where you could unite the research groups of Europe, like it was already done in the US, with regular meetings between the different US groups, ECOG, SWOG, NSCBP, and so on and so forth. And I was lucky that Aaron immediately embraced this idea and helped then to create the Breast International Group. At the beginning, the very first meeting, I can tell you, was extremely tense because I think many people were suspicious. They thought that perhaps we wanted just to swallow them or that they would no longer exist. But with time, we could really create a good spirit of collaboration. And you can see that on this picture a few years later, where you see a number of important people in breast cancer research in the world that became member of BIG. So today BIG is really a very large intergroup. It is in fact the largest international network of collaborative academic research groups dedicated to breast cancer research. We cover around 60 countries, and we have become known mostly for the conduct of some very large practice-changing clinical trials. And you can see that today we have a huge variety of clinical research programs. Some are indeed focusing on drugs, but we also have interesting trials looking at treatment de-escalation, for example, in the field of radiotherapy. Okay, now let's come to the history of this experience of running intergroup trials in collaboration with pharma. And clearly, what greatly helped the Breast International Group to become a legitimate entity respected by the others was the conduct of this particular trial, the HERA trial. So this was a trial that focused on HER2-positive breast cancer. And it was the trial that examined to what extent the targeted drug trastuzumab, which is an anti-HER2 monoclonal antibody, could increase the chance of cure of this cancer known to be a very aggressive cancer. So this 3-arm study was the first really very important trial that BIG did run, and you can see the different regions of the world that were involved in this trial. So Europe was, of course, involved for the major part, but we also had some contribution from Canada, South America, Japan, Australia, South Africa. And this trial was a big success. It was a positive study. It was presented at the same time as 2 other trials from the US examining the same question. And we could observe that indeed the addition of trastuzumab to adjuvant systemic chemotherapy decreased the risk of a recurrence by almost 50%. But this is what people don't know. It is the history of this trial behind the curtains. So how did it happen? In October 2000, it is the company Roche which convened an advisory board to start discussing a possible trial of adjuvant trastuzumab for Europe. And during that meeting, we developed the design of the study. And since it was impossible to get all the European countries to agree on the same chemotherapy regimen, we got this idea to give trastuzumab after chemotherapy. So it was a sequential administration that we decided to test in this trial. And because we had good ideas, we managed to convince the company to work with us, and we signed a first agreement in January 2001. A few months later, in the summer, I received a letter that Roche had decided to stop the collaboration. And you have to realize that in these 9 months, there were, of course, lots of discussion on how we would conduct this trial, what would be under the responsibility of the pharmaceutical company, what would be the responsibility of the academic group. It was not easy. The lawyers were involved, and what probably happened is that the company got very scared. They got afraid that they would lose control. And so they just announced that they would conduct this trial as a pure pharmaceutical trial. And then, thanks to my friend Aaron, we decided that we would not let it go like this. And we organized an incredible teleconference of more than 50 people all around the world joining this TC. So there were people that, you know, were joining at midnight in Australia and very early in the morning in Canada. And we discussed what we would do, and we decided that we would simply boycott the study. It was an incredible moment. And so I wrote a letter back to Roche, and I explained that if they stay with their decision not to collaborate with us, we would not put a single patient in their trial. So at that point, well, they didn't have a lot of options. You know, they had to find investigators in some countries that were not part of BIG, but it was obvious that this was becoming very difficult. So we had a high-level meeting organized in Switzerland with 8 of us traveling there, meeting the top people of the company, and they reversed their decision. And the trial was conducted as a partnership between Roche and the Breast International Group. It was a big success. We did recruit close to 5,000 patients in a little less than 3 years. And we could then, of course, release the results of this trial at the same time as our American colleagues. And very early after that, Roche succeeded with the data of the study to register trastuzumab for use in Europe. So an incredible history, but that in a way was helpful because it showed to investigators from the academic world that we can, when we are united, we have a power, we can have an influence on the way things are done in research. So after that, as you can see, we have conducted other very large trials of anti-HER2 agents in the adjuvant setting. So, for example, the big ALTO trial, and more recently, the Affinity trial. And so we, as you can see, have this capacity to recruit patients extremely rapidly. Of course, the setting up of the trial takes a long time, because there are lots of agreements that have to be put in place, and that's going to be heavier than if you just run a trial at a national level. But after that, because of the speed of recruitment, we can really show that we are more effective than if the trial is just conducted in one country. Now, we have built a model in BIG that we continue to defend, but it is very difficult to keep this model alive. It is a model where we work together with the company, but the database is with an academic group. The efficacy data are not shared with the company. The safety data are shared with the company. And so every 2 weeks, we set up a conference call with responsible people on the academic side, responsible people on the pharma side, and we discuss all the safety issues, all the logistical problems that we try to solve together. But the efficacy data are not shared with the company. They are only seen by, in fact, an independent academic statistician. I will come back to this. You will see that, however, there is a very strong collaboration between the two entities in the design of the study and the elaboration of the statistical plan, which is very critical for these registration trials, which are incredibly expensive. Now, something very important, a big advantage of this model is that the biospecimens are under academic control. And I'm telling you that this, in my view, is something that should always be the case, but it's not the case if a trial is completely run by a pharmaceutical industry. And if you read the Lancet, next week, you will discover a letter that we have co-signed, several of us, in reaction to a decision of the company Amgen to destroy all the biospecimens of a large adjuvant trial that turned out to be negative. It was the DCARE study looking at adjuvant denosumab. Unfortunately, this was a negative study, but women, as always, trusted their physicians and accepted to donate their tumors and their blood samples for future research. And we think it's just a shame that the company is now wanting to destroy all the specimens. And so in this letter, we draw the attention of the public to what can happen if you do not have a mechanism in place to protect the biobank linked to a clinical trial. That is always very important to guide future research. What we also try to secure in the big trials, and I can tell you it's very difficult, it's the long-term follow-up. Because of course the company, once the primary endpoint is reached, once they can market their drug, they are no longer interested in the trial. They have other priorities, and we have to fight to make sure that we have the financial support to ensure the long-term follow-up, which is very important, in particular to pick up potential late toxicities. So let me now share with you what I consider are the strengths and the weaknesses of this particular hybrid model. So you have to be conscious that today, probably 90% of clinical trials are pharmaceutical industry run trials. You have a very small proportion of pure academic trials, and then big is there with this hybrid model that we are fighting to ensure the survival, and it's very difficult, I can tell you. So the strengths of the model are that commercial bias and conflicts of interest between the parties are reduced. Academia, and this is important because academia is heavily involved, is doing a huge amount of work. Academia has a sense of ownership of the trial. And so investigators are more enthusiastic than if they just put patients in trials of pharma and they have very little to do with the conduct and the analysis of the study. Pharmaceutical industry can, in this model, avoid investing huge amounts of money into a black box. So we have improved the model compared to the past. In the past, trials run by the academia were a black box indeed. So the industry gave money and didn't hear anything for 3 to 4 years. That we think is no longer acceptable in the modern world. They take a huge risk in running the trials. They have to be part of the collaboration in an active way. For patients, this model guarantees full transparency of the results, even if the results are not good. A high quality of the data is guaranteed, and the long-term follow-up is more likely to be secured, as well as the preservation of the biospecimens. Now, there are vulnerabilities of this model. For example, pharma will not accept delays on agreed milestones. So you have to promise certain things, but you have to fulfill the promise. Otherwise, the model will completely disappear. That means that you need a very strong leadership on the side of academia so that you make sure that the agenda is respected. And for pharma, acquiring trust in academia takes time. And what we have seen over the years, and it's really very distressful, is that, of course, there is a very high turnover of pharmaceutical leaders that far exceeds the turnover of academic leaders. So if you manage in building a very good relationship with a pharma, 4 years later, you want to run another trial with the same company, and you will see that all the people you were dealing with have disappeared. You have to start everything from scratch again, explaining how the model works and why it can be potentially a win-win model. And then, of course, what remains very difficult in my experience is the treatment tailoring efforts. So all the research around biomarkers, in my view, remains very unsatisfactory. And that probably explains why we have so few biomarkers that have been fully validated and that allow us to really tailor treatment for our patients. Okay, now some lessons that we learned over the years. I will first start with a positive story, then a negative one, and then a worrisome one. So the positive story is the story of the large trials that we conducted to fine-tune adjuvant endocrine treatment for postmenopausal women on one hand, and that was a trial called BIC 198 that enrolled more than 8,000 postmenopausal women, and also fine-tuning adjuvant endocrine treatment for young women, premenopausal women. And these are two trials that we did run. They are called SOFT and TEXT, and they enrolled more than 5,400 women. And the question there has really been, who needs more than the well-tolerated and rather cheap drug tamoxifen? So, starting with postmenopausal women, we had an interaction with Novartis, and Novartis had in mind to run the very simple, straightforward study, tamoxifen versus letrozole. So the two-arm option that you see on the slide. And we were not satisfied with this in academia, because in the clinic we know that some women have huge problems in tolerating aromatase inhibitors. In the real world, up to 40% of women will stop the drug because of side effects. And so it took us about 12 months to convince the leadership of Novartis that a more useful trial would be a 4-arm study, where we would have the 2 arms that they are interested in, but they would accept us to run 2 sequential arms, tamoxifen followed by letrozole, letrozole followed by tamoxifen. At the end, they accepted. And I can tell you it was really good news, because what did we learn with the conduct of this trial? Well, we learned that, of course, letrozole is slightly better than tamoxifen when you give it for 5 years. But what we also learned was that the sequence, letrozole for 2 years followed by tamoxifen, was in appearance as good as letrozole alone for 5 years. What you see in the curves on the right part of the slide, you can hardly see a difference between these 2 arms. And that is very important in the clinic, because if we have patients struggling with an aromatase inhibitor, we refer to the trial, we tell them to try to take this drug for 2 years, and then we switch them to tamoxifen. So this was a positive story in this collaborative effort between academia and industry. Now, a negative story. This was the very large ALTO study. So you remember we had this huge success with the HERA trial. And so the GSK company came to us asking if we could help them studying their drug lapatinib, which is HER2 tyrosine kinase inhibitor, if we could help them bringing this drug to the treatment of early HER2-positive breast cancer. There were a lot of interesting preclinical data on lapatinib. It was a drug that was a very potent signaling network inhibitor. It had very attractive features. It was a novel drug, low cardiotoxicity, some activity against brain metastasis in advanced disease. and no cross-resistance with tamoxifen. So we designed a very complicated study that looked at trastuzumab alone, lapatinib alone, the sequencing of the two drugs, or the combination. And that's why this trial was a huge trial of more than 8,000 patients. But at the time we designed the trial, we had not realized that, in fact, the main mechanism of action of trastuzumab is an immune mechanism of action, and not just an inhibition of a signal transduction pathway in the cancer cell. And so in this story, we first faced a problem in that the lapatinib alone arm was stopped by the Independent Data Monitoring Committee because it showed inferior anti-tumor activity compared to trastuzumab. But then, let me show you. So this was the design of the trial. So this lapatinib alone arm, the second arm, was stopped. And we were then left with 3 arms. And we had a very good statistical plan designed at the beginning. And under the pressure of the company, we accepted to change the statistical plan while the trial was running. A big mistake. So the company got worried because the combination of the 2 drugs, lapatinib and trastuzumab, gave a lot of diarrhea. And a significant proportion of patients had dose reduction of lapatinib. And then they asked us to put to divide the alpha in this trial between the 2 arms, while the initial statistical plan was to first examine if the combination was superior, and then if the combination was superior, we would then examine the sequence. So we accepted to change and to split the alpha between the 2 arms, and as a result, the trial was negative because, you see, we had, for being able to declare superiority of the combination, we had to have an alpha of 0.025, and the same for the sequence. And here were the results. And there, of course, it was a huge disappointment because, in fact, the combination arm was superior to trastuzumab alone, but the p-value was 0.048. And because of the change in the statistical plan, this could no longer be considered as statistically significant. So here, clearly, in our interaction of pharma, we didn't play a good role. We should have convinced them not to change the plan. And you can imagine that a negative trial of 8,000 women is a huge amount of money lost, millions of dollars. Now, about biomarker discovery, I told you that I am very worried that the way we conduct clinical trials today, even according to the big model where we have some ownership on the biospecimens, I think it's totally unsatisfactory. As a matter of fact, in HER2-positive breast cancer, we are still there with one single validated biomarker, which is HER2. And this is in spite of having looked at thousands of other potential candidate biomarkers that belong to the downstream signaling pathways or to the microenvironment, or that have to do with tumor heterogeneity. So what we did produce was a lot of publications. So this biomarker translational research was very productive for the curriculum vitae of investigators, but not at all for patients, because none of these biomarkers has entered the clinic. So we can discuss that later, but here we have a serious problem. And I have more and more the impression that we underestimate the fact that to validate biomarkers, we do not need 4,000 patients, we need 20, 30,000, which means that we probably need to invent a model where we do share these biomarker results and the clinical outcome a lot more than we do today. So clearly, the answer to this question is no. This research has not been addressing the needs of our patients. Okay, now, having said that, you see what we have seen in these first generation of trials looking at the addition of trastuzumab to adjuvant chemotherapy, clearly we have made progress, but you can see that patients treated with trastuzumab still have a risk of relapse. And some patients, that's the gray curve, that do not receive trastuzumab have an excellent outcome. And we have not been able to identify who are these patients, the ones that relapse in spite of trastuzumab and the ones that do not need trastuzumab because chemotherapy helps them in a significant way. And here comes also a very worrisome discovery, is that things evolve at an extreme speed today in oncology. When I started my career, you know, we were talking about 2 taxanes, paclitaxel, docetaxel, about 3 endocrine agents, 3 aromatase inhibitors, anastrozole, letrozole, exemestane. Today, if you look, there are, I don't know how many anti-PD-1, anti-PD-L1 drugs. So there is an explosion of drugs around there. And what that tells you is that your translational research has to be incredibly efficient. If it takes too long to discover something, you will never be able to validate what you have discovered. And for example, there have been these 2 nice, elegant publications in 2015, 2013 by Sherin Loy from Australia, who worked on the HERA trial, and from Soon Peck, who worked on a US trial, and they have both discovered something interesting. If a HER2-positive breast cancer has a high level of estrogen receptors, but a low expression of HER2, a low FISH ratio, apparently there is no benefit from trastuzumab. So 2 concordant observations, but no way to validate this, because in 2015, it is impossible to come back and to say to her patient with HER2-positive breast cancer, we think you don't need trastuzumab. We are going to run a trial where you have 50% chance of not getting this drug. This will never happen. So it indicates that if you want to do translational research, you have to find a way to do it extremely fast and efficiently. And then, of course, there is this phenomenal problem that I don't know how we can address, which is the huge bureaucracy associated to clinical and translational research. Really, when I was 30 years old and when I wanted to develop a protocol, it took me perhaps 6 months between the day I discussed the protocol with my mentor and the day I could open my study. And this is by no means possible today anymore. You know the bureaucracy, and you know that it will take much more than 6 months to launch a clinical trial. So in the big trials, we have, of course, governance that has been criticized by people, because it is true, it is heavy, and I would love to find a way, of course, to simplify things. But you need to have some rules in place when you have so many actors involved. So what we have in our big trials is, and that's very important, is a relatively small joint study management team, where you have an equal number of representatives from academia and industry. So the black people are the people from the pharma, and the orange ones are from academia. Then we have a large steering committee. In the steering committee, we have all the investigators putting patients in the trial from the different countries. We also have pharma representatives, but as you can see, they are a small minority. And because a very large steering committee of 50 people is not very functional, the steering committee can delegate some activities to a smaller executive committee. We also very often set up a translational research committee. In parallel, the translational research committee has an advisory role. It will advise the steering committee to conduct or not conduct some translation research proposed by investigators from the network or sometimes from outside of the network. Yeah, and of course, on covering all that, you have the independent data monitoring committee, which is essential, as you know. Now, when you work with the pharmaceutical industry, you have to come up with a clear vision on how you are going to address all the pieces of this puzzle that you see here. The interaction with the IDMC, how you are going to conduct the trial, what kind of monitoring you will provide, how you are going to solve the problems. Of course, you need to agree on the study design and the statistical plan. You need to agree on country and site selection. I already told you that the database, this is a non-negotiable factor. The database has to stay with academia, but you have to accept that the pharma can have access to some portions of the database, mainly related to safety. Then you have to design how you are going to analyze the results, who is going to be in charge of regulatory submission. In general, I can tell you it's the company. And then the publication has, of course, to be done with some kind of supervision by pharma. Once the primary endpoint is reached, you have to make sure that the trial will continue to be alive, because there are secondary endpoints that are important to analyze. And then, of course, you need to agree on how you are going to organize the steering committee, the translational research committee, and very importantly, you need to be able at the end to sign a contract. I can tell you that in my experience, the most difficult portion of this puzzle is, of course, the contract, the legal contract. And if you want not to experience too much delay in initiating your clinical trial, start working on the contract from day zero. That's the first recommendation I would make today. And the second one is that don't delegate the problems related to the contract only to the lawyers on both sides. It will never work. So if there is an item that is blocking the contract, you have to join a teleconference and you have to be there next to your lawyer, and you have to ask also the company to come with the person who is able to make important decisions. That's the only way it can work. Otherwise, you can lose easily 18 months in discussing back and forth. Study design and statistical plan is, of course, also very important. And I believe that in this model where there is this close interaction between academia and pharma, very often we come up with the best possible study designs. But it's not always the case. I gave you the example of the ALTO study. Contract we discussed already. Okay, so why am I worried today? I am worried because this model that we are pushing through the Breast International Group, where we have the control of the database, at least for the efficacy data, where the efficacy data are only shared with pharma after reaching the primary endpoint, but where we allow some sharing of safety data, this model is becoming very difficult to maintain. There is an alternative model that is becoming very popular, and that is already endorsed by a lot of people in the academic world because, in my opinion, it is easy. And this is a model where the database is with the pharmaceutical company, but they put together a trial steering committee. They invite you to sit there and they ask your opinion from time to time while the trial is running. And I believe this model is inferior to the other one. I also know, because I have also been a member of such trial steering committees, that you control very little. But what is very attractive, in particular for some young investigators, is that without too much effort, at the end of the day, if you are the principal investigator, you will have a nice publication in the New England Journal of Medicine. And that is why I am worried, because, of course, if this model is going to continue to proliferate, the other one where academia has more control will perhaps completely disappear. And I think that this is not at all in the best interest of our patients. Now, the final point I want to raise with you is that it is difficult to keep a large academic group together. You have tensions, you have conflicts, and you have to solve them. And I can tell you it takes a lot of time, but you need to solve the conflicts as they arise. If you ignore them, they will become just impossible to solve. So the very first thing that you need, of course, is to transmit a vision that people can get excited about, a vision and a mission. You have to pay attention to the fact that the leadership roles will be rotated, that it's not always the same people who run the show. You have to recognize the contribution of everyone involved, even if sometimes the contribution is a small one. I think everybody is important. And as I told you, very importantly, you have to spend time in resolving conflicts. And so if you look a little bit at the publications of the Breast International Group, contrary to the publications of some other groups that are very famous, you will see that there is this rotation of first author and last author. We try to be fair and to recognize the work of everybody. And then, of course, you have to recognize the very hard work of the staff at the headquarters, the people who are really managing all the data, monitoring the centers. They work behind the scene, but their work is, of course, absolutely crucial. And then I don't know if I still have, how much time do I still have, Carmela? 5 minutes or
Yeah.
2 minutes?
Yeah. 2 minutes maybe,
Yeah,
because we have some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope there are some questions. So this was not, in fact, the subject of the talk, but I can tell you that it is very important to also try to run these high-profile academic trials and not just be there to run the trials that pharma wants to run. And the Breast International Group, in fact, in retrospect, is most proud of its academic trials because they are really important for women. They have mobilized a lot of energy, but they have been able, or they will be able one day, to have a big impact on patients. So, for example, the POSITIVE trial is a trial in which we examine the following question. Is it possible in a young woman who wants to have a child and who is on adjuvant endocrine treatment? You know that these adjuvant endocrine treatments are very long today. They last for 5 to 10 years. Is it possible to interrupt the treatment for 2 years to allow a pregnancy? A trial that has zero commercial interest. The cost of the trial was 7.5 million euros that we had to raise, but it has completed accrual. We have more than 500 women who entered in this single arm study. We have more than 300 babies born. And now we have to wait, of course. We have to look in the following years if indeed our hypothesis that the relapse rate will not be increased is confirmed, which would be excellent news, of course, for many young patients with breast cancer in the world. Then you probably heard, I hope you heard about the MINDAC trial, which was also very difficult to run and to find the funding, but which is a positive trial that today allows de-escalation of chemotherapy in postmenopausal women at high clinical risk, but who have a favorable genomic signature. And the last academic effort that we are also proud of running and which is still ongoing is Aurora, which is a very ambitious molecular screening program for metastatic breast cancer, where we try to understand this disease that, as you know, is still incurable today. I will stop here, Carmela, because I agree that we need to save some time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Vical. Maybe we already have some questions, but maybe I would ask maybe Alessandro if you already have some thoughts also or comments.
Well, I believe that Martina did a great job, and I just want to say that, I mean, I'm happy to see that the model that we have been using for rare cancer, it works perfectly well also in common cancer like breast cancer, basically. For two reasons. Number one, because even breast cancer is becoming more and more splitted in several different diseases. She alluded this at the beginning. It's not only estrogen positive and estrogen negative disease. Is basically now a much more variegated disease and needs collaboration. So I do believe that networks, so creating networks to put together the major players around the world to run together academic study is a key. Also in negotiating with pharma, but not only with negotiating with pharma, is a key to run studies that pharma will not run. Because pharma is interested in selling drugs. And of course, it's important for them to sell drugs because this makes them raise money that they will use to invest in research and developing new drugs that we need. So I don't want to say that they are wrong. I'm just saying that they may have a slightly different agenda from us. So we collaborate on multiple topics, but we may also need to try to go on our own. And in order to do so, creating networks, I think, is the most successful way to be able to get funds from other parties, other sources. And again, we did a similar effort with rare cancer, with sarcomas. So we created a network for a very rare disease like erythropoietin sarcoma that now involve 160 institutions over 60 countries and 4 continents, which has been critical to improve the field a lot and also to run the first randomized study in the disease ever conducted. So I believe that, I mean, of course, there's a history of randomized study in breast cancer that, I mean, is impressive, and the disease have so many randomized trials like breast cancer has, but the way to go is very similar.
And I forget to tell you that for MindAct, the surgeons were the most enthusiastic people. They were so enthusiastic, they helped find the funding in the different countries. So we managed to find money a little bit everywhere, in Spain, in France, in UK, and that's how we could conduct this very ambitious study.
But you need, I think what you need is motivation. No? So if you are able to motivate and commitment and not to lose the momentum. And so what the networking help the most, I believe, is to maintain the momentum, because you maintain the people on board. I totally agree with Martin that you need to give a role to everybody, especially the major player, because nobody needs to feel to be left apart or to lose his position or his visibility. So everybody has to, and rotating the position in the paper is critical for collaborating. So you don't have, I mean, not because you have initiated the collaboration, you need to be always the first or the last author in a paper. Otherwise, you will lose the motivation of your collaborators. So
the only exception is NSABP. Yeah. You know, NSABP had Bernard Fisher, a famous surgeon, first author of I don't know how many papers, yeah. and the group survived.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, it's an exception more than a rule, and I believe, and I think making everybody happy, again, is a way to not only to do a study, but to maintain a momentum, a tradition of running one study after the other.
Yeah.
And I have seen this also going on in a rare cancer like sarcoma. So I tell you that we did very many things over the past years that were only able because of this way of doing things. So, and again, here we have Anti-Cancer Fund who has supported at least one important of them. And since they are here, I want just to thank them again, as I did already in the past. But I mean, I believe that the success in this collaboration is also the fact that you're able to show to the payers or to the parties that, as I said before, by putting together the major players, you are doing something that will impact the course of the disease or the way the disease is treated over the next years. It's not that I'm doing my study or you're doing your study. We are doing a global study or a large study on a global scale that will definitely change the way these patients are treated. So aiming at really changing things is important. And the only way to do so is to go together.
Maybe I want to also ask Lydie because she raised a question and maybe she has also comments. Lydie?
Lydie,
sorry, yeah, I'm muted. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question, and I know in hindsight, but if you now look back at the HERA study and the discussions we now have on de-escalation, at that moment, was it ever thought of 6 months treatment? And is that something that the academics could have brought to the table and forced on the pharma? That because I always think it's a pity that we have to wait and then afterwards start the de-escalation. Why can we not implement that in a much earlier stage at the design?
Well, Lydie, that's a very good question. I will be honest. I'm here to tell you the truth. So we were not smart because we didn't think of 6 months. As a matter of fact, we thought that trastuzumab was going to work like tamoxifen. And tamoxifen, you know, we showed that 1 year works, that 2 years is better than 1, that 5 is better than 2, and then 10 better than 5. Well, so we pushed the industry with the 2-year arm. In retrospect, it was a mistake, although somebody had to do that, because if you don't test this, there are oncologists that are going to think, maybe I need to give this drug for longer. So we didn't propose the 6 months. Now, when Roche came with the second antibody, pertuzumab, we discussed, we tried the 6 months. You know, we told them, if these 2 antibodies work, it's going to be very expensive, only a few regions of the world. So why don't you accept a third arm, 6 months, and you will be able to sell your drugs in more places of the world. Didn't help. We did not succeed. There was no compromise possible. And I agree with you, if we don't put a shorter duration in the very first study, it's almost impossible to de-escalate afterwards. Now, I could give a talk on the de-escalation trials, but to make a long story short, they took too long to complete. They took 8 years, the UK trial, the French trial, looking at 6 months, they took 8 years. Why? You know why? Because in the meantime, pharma was interested in dual blockade, coming with a second drug. So we started the pharmaceutical trials, looking at more than one drug, and these trials are better paid. Let me be just blunt. So if I am in a hospital and I receive 10,000 euro per patient for one study and 500 for the de-escalation trial, well, you know, many hospitals will choose the pharma study. So they suffered from this. And when they had their results, for example, we no longer use sequential trastuzumab like in HERA, because now we know that it's better to combine with chemo. In the de-escalation trials, half of the patients had the sequential treatment. So then you look at the results and you think, are they still, you know, relevant for the practice of today? So, you know, the only way this could work, but it's just a dream. Huh? I thought that governments should pay for the risky arm. I agree that the shorter duration is a risky arm for pharma. So pharma will never accept. They should bear the cost of this arm. And so if it works, it's all benefit for them, right? They will save money. And if it doesn't work, well, the company will still be happy. But otherwise, we'll never succeed.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same discussions. We now have applications for the use of checkpoint inhibitors in neoadjuvant. And of course, pharma is not interested in indications where they are running a trial for maintenance. Researchers want neoadjuvant. You can imagine that they don't. And for us, how it doesn't make sense to fund something where you know it will never be accepted for market authorization in that situation. So we are really, yeah, quasi, and I think we really need, as you rightly say, a change in pharmaceutical legislation, that the design of the trials should be, for registration, should be agreed upon by the regulators, by the patients, by the clinicians, and that's also our ultimate dream.
Yeah.
That the design should be agreed. Europe wants to make things patient-centered, but it's at the moment of the design that the input is needed from all parties, from all stakeholders, I think. But okay, that's a dream.
Yeah, I discussed with some people of the EMA and also the FDA, and you know, the answer was, we are there to make sure that patients are safe, that a drug works without harming patients. If the company comes with a design that looks reasonable, we are not there to indicate that they should look at a third arm or this and that. So if they are not doing it, who is going to do it, right? So I agree with you. It's very difficult.
A while ago, we also mentioned, of course, among the stakeholders are the patient advocates and the patients. And so now at BIG, we are really trying to really push forward for that. Sometimes missing part is the really understanding the patient priorities when we develop the clinical trials and the design of the clinical trials, because as we know, sometimes the endpoints that are important for the clinicians, or well, for in this case for the pharmaceutical company, it's not always the same endpoint that is relevant for the patients. And sometimes I feel like we know, we as doctors, we know our patients, but we are still surprised at, you know, sometimes how different the perspective is in terms of their priorities and in terms of what is important for them. So so I think that more and more, a lot of the groups, at least the ones who are working with BIG, are really thinking about this now. And I must say that, yeah, in the field of breast cancer and sarcoma, this is probably one of the few research disease entities where the large-scale collaboration has really definitely shown that it can help change practice. It's not the same for many other research disease entities. But this collaborative effort is, I think, best exemplified in the sarcoma group and in the breast cancer group as well. I don't know, Isabel, maybe do you have some comments also?
Well, I just a few words, because I think we are a little running late. So thank you, Martin, because I think it was a very inspiring talk. I think that if I have to say something to the young surgical oncologists, I would say that, you know, you can always participate in research. There are many cooperative groups, nationally cooperative groups, that at the end are part of international groups. And that's a very good way, even though many of them are formed by medical oncologists. I mean, it's good to be part of those cooperative groups, because you learn how to design trials, you learn how to participate. And, you know, at the end, you know, that's the best way to start doing research on your own. And it's good just to go to the cooperative groups meetings and listen to what they say. I think that's a very good way of learning how things can go on your research program. Yeah. So thank you, Martin. I think it was really good to have your experience in all this.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was also one thing that maybe I would, maybe as a few, because we're almost out of time, a few last comments maybe from Dr. Picard, because our audience is actually a lot of young surgeons. A lot of them are not so experienced yet, or are daunted by large-scale international research that like for example, the things, the trials you have led, maybe a few words to somehow encourage the young surgeons from an oncologist point of view.
Well, what I very often tell the young people training here in my institute is that research is like your oxygen balloon. It is really what will help you remain positive. And if there is something cancer patients need, it is this. It is a doctor who is optimistic. You know, the worst that can happen, you are a cancer patient, you sit in front of the doctor and the doctor is almost crying and is completely depressed. No, that's what we don't need. So you need to be positive, and to be positive, you need research. You need to have the hope that research provides. And what Carmela said and what Isabel said is correct. You know, it doesn't depend what is your specialty. If you are a radiotherapy surgeon, medical oncologist, by belonging to groups, you will, first of all, learn a lot. You will become stronger in your specialty. You will be able to better evaluate when interactions with the others is absolutely critical. So you will do your traditional job better, but you will also prepare this oxygen balloon that will help you remaining a positive oncologist for all your career and not starting a burnout at age 40. I've seen this, it's not a joke, it happens. So it's very important.
You'll also have much more fun.
Exactly. Yes.
So I
a lot of
think,
friends all around the world.
yeah.
Yes, a lot of friends all around the world. That's the thing.
Yes.